free speech in our universities. I mean, Monash University today, look, earlier this year already warned students that if they didn't do a course on Labor's planned Aboriginal-only parliament, they could not graduate, they could not sit exams, they could not even use the library. Now, Monash quietly dropped that attempt at brainwashing when Sky News reported it. But now there's been another outrageous attempt to force its ideological agenda onto students. This time it marked down a student in its engineering faculty who didn't include an acknowledgement of country in his assignment, an engineering one. The student complained and the university, to its credit, has now upheld it. It ruled that the engineering faculty had to remove the requirement that students include an acknowledgement of country from all assessment tasks, and it ordered the students' marks to be restored. But how did it get that far? Well, there's a new book out that looks at this obsession with race politics, especially at how Aboriginal culture is being reinvented and turned into a prison that traps Aboriginal children in particular. It's by Gary Johns, a former minister in the Keating Labor government, who's written several books on race politics, and this one is called The Burden of Culture. Gary Johns joins me now. Gary, great to catch up again. Hey, listen, this demand that students start assignments with an acknowledgement that are on Aboriginal lands, they pay their respects to owners past, present, emerging, blah, blah. It's now almost everywhere, including in Qantas when you now land somewhere. What do you make of that?
Well, it's like a reverse takeover, Andrew. It's Aboriginal colonialism, if you like, and it's an attempt to make us feel guilty about the so-called destruction of Aboriginal culture. But let me tell you who is suffering from Aboriginal culture, and that's about 20% of Aboriginal people who live in mainly remote communities. You know, 80% of Aborigines live about as well as all other Australians, but it's that last group who've been captured, if you like. They are the poster children of inner city Aboriginals who say, this is how Aborigines live. Isn't our culture wonderful? But no one ever describes what that culture is. Now, matters between families are settled by violence. People demand share, that is, they bludge off each other. They can't explain why someone dies in the care of another person, so they have to blame that person. There is payback. These are all of the elements of culture that public servants tell us that we should respect. This is crazy stuff.
That's, of course, in some communities, and in others it's not. But the point is that I think Aboriginal culture is being turned into and reinvented in many cases, because Aboriginal culture pre-white colonialism didn't, you know, it's very different. No one lives that way now. It's largely an adaptation or a maladaptation in some cases, an invention. And you say it's a trap. Why do you say that?
Well, for instance, yes, in a society pre-1788, you had to share food because someone might find food one day, another day someone else does. You need to share it in order to stay alive. Today, you don't need to share because there's plenty available. You need to invest in yourself. And if you can't read, write and speak English well, then you're in big trouble in this society. And yet Aboriginal elders and leaders, particularly in the East Coast, say it's okay. You don't have to play by the white man's rules. This is why Aborigines, mainly in remote and some regional areas, are literally trapped, because they have an attitude now that's grown since, frankly, 1967, when they achieved absolute equality. There's an attitude now that says, I don't have to play your game. I can just be an Aboriginal. And I'm telling you, it's not enough to be Aboriginal. You can have your identity, but you still have to read, write, speak English, and get to places where there are real jobs and contribute to Australian society. It needs a heck of a lot more than just playing at being a voice and play acting at being Aboriginal.
Well, I think you make a really good point in your book that almost every Aboriginal leader I can think of did get an education, speaks English extremely well. They've actually assimilated in large part, or entirely. They've adapted into the culture in order to conquer it. And they tend to speak on behalf of people who don't and live much less rich lives themselves. And you call this a new colonisation.
It is. Look, the positive part of this story is to say most Aborigines have escaped, if you like, the plan for them. They haven't stuck to the script. They've intermarried. They've married out into the wider society. I'm not saying they have to do that, but the point is you can't get any more reconciled than an Aboriginal person marrying a non-Aboriginal person, and that's true for about 70% of all Aborigines. They're married to a non-Aborigine. So we're well and truly reconciled. The problem with the, if you like, the 20%, you know where I get that figure? 20% of all Aboriginal men have been to jail. These are literally trapped, going round and round and round without good English, without a good education,
Gary,
and living in
book,
places where there's no
I've
work.
got to go because Prime Minister Albanese is going to have a press conference. Thank you for joining us.